Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to the final episode of this first season of That Ultimate Video Game List Show. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey from ThatNerdySite.com, and this is the show where each season, me and a panel of friends try to create the ultimate top 20 video game list with two main bits of criteria. Only one game per franchise, and only one game per console. Joining me on this first season are three of my fellow nerds from That Nerdy Site, Logan Wilkinson.
We made it! We're
We
not
made
dead.
it.
We didn't kill each other yet, yeah.
Indeed. We got Cameron Abbott.
Hey, what's going on? Time to crack open a cold one.
I knew we were going to get it back for
One last time, man.
One last time.
Hey, I heard the cries of the fans out there. They're like, where was Cameron popping open a cold one for us?
Brandon Gann was furious, alright?
Yeah, he was, well, I wouldn't say furious. He was heartbroken.
I mean, he's probably furious, but not about that. More about like where his favorite games have ended up on our list. I think his number one's still
His number one is still in
the
here,
running.
yeah.
So
Is what he said,
I
yeah.
think we're okay there. And then rounding out the group, we got Frank Bazzani. How you doing, Frank?
Good. How are you doing today?
Doing all right. We're recording this on a leisurely Saturday. Give me some time to edit it after like super stressfully having to edit that wannabe film class at like the super last minute this last week. So I'm enjoying that I've got like a week to go for this one. So real quick before we get into the list, a little bit of housekeeping. If you like what you hear, please remember to rate, review, like, and subscribe everywhere you can. If you're feeling extra generous, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. We'd be very appreciative if you did. So the way the show works is like this. We began by taking turns adding games to our list until we reached 20, and for the past few heated weeks, we've had some wonderful lively debate to rank our games number 20 through 6, and today is the day that we will crown our best game of all time, which will be our first inductee to our Hall of Fame and retired from the list for future seasons. So a real quick rundown of games 20 through 6. At 20, we had Sonic the Hedgehog 2, 19, Mega Man 2, 18, James Bond 007 Nightfire, 17, Pokemon Soul Silver, 16, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, 15, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, 14, Tetris Effect, 13, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, 12, The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, 11, Super Mario Galaxy 2, 10, Portal 2, 9, Earthbound, 8, Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, 7, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and number 6, Bioshock. So still to go today, we have Persona 4 Golden, Final Fantasy VI, The Last of Us, God of War from 2018, and Mass Effect 2. So yeah, let's get into it. I think I want to kick us off before Logan can with Mass Effect 2 at number 5.
Very chill.
It was Logan was very adamant that it not make it any further down the list, and I think I'm okay having it at 5. What do you guys think, Cam and Frank?
I'll just say this, Frank, I'm going to follow your lead on this.
Man, that's what I was going to say for you. Because I thought we were pretty much dead in the water here. But if you were going to fight the fight, I was going to back you up.
I will say I think that number 5 is a well placed place for Mass Effect 2. Because I don't think I could argue it higher than a couple of these games. That's the thing. It's like, if we don't put Mass Effect 2 here, what goes here? And that will lead to, I think, like either a total split or a 50-50 split. And I don't think that it's gonna make it past it, Frank. I'm gonna be honest. I'm willing to see the Normandy off one last time at number 5. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely. I guess that's definitely like how everything's kind of fallen, and I'm okay with that. And all I can say is like Mass Effect 2, great game, one of the best probably ever.
Absolutely, yeah. Number 5. I think Logan had mentioned that he was ready to get rid of it a couple episodes ago in last week's episode, and I think much like Cameron's, Wind Waker, I think there was enough like love among the other three panelists to keep it on and make it up to the top 5 here. I think we talked a lot about it last week, but I think one of the things it has going against it for the sake of this list is that it is like the middle chapter within a larger story, and while it is a very, I think, standalone chapter and a very like incredible one at that, I think that does hurt a little bit compared to everything else we have kind of still to go. Is pretty much like, hey, this like is, I mean, with the exception, I guess, of God of War, but God of War is so far removed from where that game has come from that
Hmm.
like the historical context of the other games adds a little bit of flavor to it, but I think God of War stands alone on its own as well. Um, but yeah, Mass Effect 2, great game. I think this is maybe the one that Brandon was holding out hope for, because he mentioned that it got a lot of talk in this in last week's episode. But um, so if that is the case, Brandon, sorry to see it go. But Mass Effect 2, great game, a worthy number 5 on our list. Um, cool, yay! A more or less painless start to the episode. Any final thoughts from you, Logan? I know you'd kind of railed against it in the past.
Yeah, I think it's the thing that we've touched on before with me and Cameron, usually, because we're the two kind of going at it, is that I think every game list, I think all 20 games in the entire list are good video games. And I think by the time we really get out of like the top 15, I think they're all unquestionably like great and fantastic video games. We're being tasked to rank the greatest games of all time. They're all good video games, all great video games. My, beef with Mass Effect was never that it was a bad video game or never that it was a terrible video game. I don't think either thing is true. It was always, I just thought there were better games in my mind ahead of it. It is still a great game, and it has made it into the top 5 greatest games of all time. So it's like, I don't think there can be too many complaints.
Yeah, it
about
was
its place in here.
also as a round 3 pick. It was the latest game still on our list at this point.
Exactly. Again, what we said from pretty much early on is like the first 4 we picked was gonna go pretty damn far.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess correct me if I'm wrong to the rest of the panel, but I would see the next 2 slots being a toss-up between Final Fantasy VI and Persona 4 Golden.
So that's what I kind of made the assumption on.
I felt a little differently.
I would also add The Last of Us.
Oh, you think? Okay.
Mm.
All right.
I know that's going to be divisive, but I have like my biggest feeling about this is that, so like I mentioned last week, like I missed the cultural zeitgeist of The Last of Us. I got everybody telling me I needed to play it back when it was on PS3, and I didn't own a PS3. I had friends tell me that's the console seller for them when they were Xbox diehards. So going into it, I think I didn't have a lot of expectations out of it, but my expectations were still set pretty high. I think Last of Us not only met those, it exceeded my expectations in many ways. I always have had I've always felt a little odd about how do I put this without pissing anybody off? I think that people's love for it is very much well warranted. It's totally justified. However, I think that a combination of a couple of factors, one of them being like it really was like I'd argue it's one of the biggest like sells for PlayStation is that it's an exclusive. I think that it came out that it blew people away. It blew people away on a level of they just were not anticipating to see a game coming out from a studio who makes, even though like they're 100% not within my taste of genres, makes incredible action adventure games in the form of Uncharted, in the Uncharted series. So I think The Last of Us coming out of the Uncharted series company who made Crash Bandicoot, etc., you get a game that is like stunning. And I said something that set off a whole bomb that I didn't realize was a thing last week, so I will go ahead and skip over that. I think that it is, as far as a post-apocalyptic world goes, it's pretty stellar at analyzing the fallout from it, so to speak. My favorite moments in that game are moments where Joel and because Ellie's born after the fall of mankind at this point, and my favorite parts of that game are exploring a world that that Joel's so familiar with that Ellie never had the chance to know. And I think that the story between this surrogate father, surrogate daughter, as it evolves from where you start in that game and where it ends, and it's amazing because you see all these amazing sides of Joel, and
I mean, can I just say real quick
sure,
that yeah, that I appreciate what everything is Cam was saying, all the positives right now. The Last of Us isn't going to get knocked off right now, so this is kind of a pointless conversation right now. Um, like, it's not going to be eliminated right now. It's just not. So like, I feel like it's more useful of our time to talk about Final Fantasy 6 and Persona 4 Golden.
Yeah,
Because I'll veto it. It won't get knocked off right here. Like,
that's not how the Force works. But
it's not. I mean, but it's just like it just won't. Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
sure,
I, and I would
I'd
definitely
walk off the show where the Last of Us get knocked off right now at number 4. It's like this is silly. This is like I don't even know where Cam was driving to because he was saying a lot of nice things, which I appreciate. I can talk nice about the Last of Us all day long, but it's like it's not gonna be the next game knocked off the list. So like,
well, we were mentioning the 4 and 3 slot.
Yeah,
and I was saying that I would say The Last of Us goes in the 3 slot.
Right, and I would disagree with that, obviously.
So
that'll be an impasse we can get to in a second. But like, I think we talked on like number 4. Yeah,
I think we talked extensively, or not extensively, but we talked a little bit last week about like the Final Fantasy 6 versus Persona 4 Golden kind of
that's
debate.
What I expected.
And I so obviously like pick a day, and my favorite game of all time is either Final Fantasy 6 or the 2018 God of War that is still on the list. And given that Final Fantasy 6 was my favorite game, like unequivocally for 20 plus years, right when it came out in like '94, yeah, I think. Like that is the game that for me, like showed me what games can be in terms of like a broader like storytelling kind of it wasn't just running along and trying to save a princess from a castle anymore. It was, I mean, you more or less do some of that here in Final Fantasy 6. No formal princesses or whatever, but it was like such a deeper story, especially given like what else we had at the time, that I was like blown away by how grandiose this thing was. And I don't remember if I mentioned it when I brought it up on the show or when I pitched it on the show as my first selection out there. But one of the things that stands out to me from Final Fantasy VI is that like I mean, you could boil it down. I would submit to like, hey, it's like Star Wars plus steampunk, in that it is very much like a band of rebels, in this case returners, banding together trying to fight this evil empire. And they do that, and then they end up losing because this version of the empire also has their own version of the Joker, and the Joker, who thrives off of chaos, Kefka, kills the Emperor midway through the game and destroys that world. And so, like, halfway through this game, the bad guy wins. Spoilers for, a 20-plus-year-old game. And that was, like, unheard of for me. And then you have to basically spend the second half of the game bringing all your crew back together and all that stuff. I say all this to like, profess my love for it, but I'm also, and I personally, I would still go to bat that it's a better game than Persona 4 Golden, but for the sake of the list, I will sacrifice it to the number 4 slot here, because I don't think that's a fight I'm gonna win. And I do, I very much love Persona 4 Golden as well, but I think that's how I'm reading the tea leaves. So that's where I'm kind of willing to kick that off and put that here. Final Fantasy VI at number 4, if there are no objections, and if anybody else wants to speak to the game. Um, certainly, I,
Um,
I,
I'll,
I
I'll
open the floor to
Yeah.
that.
I'll speak for the game. I
Yeah, you can
do.
go.
My push was to put Final Fantasy VI at number 4. I think that Final Fantasy VI did something that was not only a leap for games at the time, but still stands out as a definitive push away from a storytelling norm that you'd expect from a Final Fantasy game. The it's so interesting because to see where it ends up, where the series ends up going, and where it was before, six kind of is the turning point for that entire franchise. It turns it into saying, we're not going to tell you a basic like fantasy story right now. You're like the people who you expect to be the bad guys, like your comic relief at the beginning of the game turns into basically God at the end of the game. It's such a inversion of what you expect out of a story, like from a series like Final Fantasy. And so for me, I do think that Final Fantasy VI is just so fantastic, and it tells stories about these incredible characters and just what they've done, what they go through, and what they deal with, and their internal struggles throughout the entire story. And I think that one of the most interesting things about the series, or about that game, is I never know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but
Celeste.
Celeste is possibly the best Final Fantasy quote unquote protagonist that the franchise has ever had, because she is not. She is outside of the beginning of that game. She's not really a damsel in distress. She is an incredibly strong, independent character who has a incredible story about her backstory, her knowledge, or her lineage, her and what she ends up doing, and the choices she makes at the end of the game are just stand out outside of the storytelling norms, especially for a game that came out in the 90s. It's truly incredible, and it without a doubt is one of the best games of all time. It's arguably the best Final Fantasy of all time. Usually you get people debating a bit more nitty gritty on that, but I will say that it stands out as just an outright phenomenal game.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I would say the having been in the like Final Fantasy ranking debates for many a year, Final Fantasy typically, for the people who've like played every game in the series, typically is in certainly in the top conversation, as kind of the general consensus. Seven certainly is the most popular of the bunch because of what it did and the time that it came out, and its place in history. But a lot of people still kind of look back very fondly on the Super Nintendo era of 6 and 4, and yeah, I think also the soundtrack, phenomenal, and I like it's one of the few video game soundtracks I will just throw on randomly to just enjoy, if I'm writing, or if I just want like some good mood music. I will throw on some Distant Worlds, specifically looking at Final Fantasy VI music. But yeah, it's like great cast of characters, great story, fun combat for the turn-based thing that it was at the time, introducing like the active time battle system, so it wasn't solely turn-based anymore. Like enemies could attack while you were making your decisions if you wanted, which added like a new layer of strategic elements to the combat. Your party, given that everybody has kind of their own separate skills, like your party composition, and the one of the things I love about the game is that throughout the course of the game, it will throw you into scenarios where basically you have to divide your team up into 2 or 3 groups, and you have to like fight through sequences with each of those teams. So you can't just you can't just have your like 4 main characters and that's who you're going to go with. I mean, you can, but you're going to be a little at a disadvantage in certain parts of the game. So it encouraged you to explore and play with every one of those characters, and explore every one of their stories throughout the game. Logan, sorry I cut you off.
No, yeah, I was just gonna say that again. Like, as somebody with kind of minimalist Final Fantasy experience and knowledge, but somebody who's had many conversations and discussions with Trevor about this game, about Final Fantasy VI. Like it is like, I feel like at a certain point it has become kind of the Wind Waker of Final Fantasy for me, where it's like I feel like it is the one where like I've actually sat down and just committed myself to actually just going through and playing it. One that I'd really love, right? Like every kind of story beat and note and kind of theme and the pitch that Trevor's given again and again and again to me has always sold me on the game. I've been like, that sounds rad. That sounds really cool. Like what this game does, like, and kind of the mid-act twist and what it turns into in the kind of back half of the game and the characters involved and the villains involved. Like, I think it is a game that's always really fascinated me and that I've been really interested by, especially in the last few years with Trevor. And so yeah, like I think it's a fantastic game. I mean, we're literally calling it the fourth best game of all time. And it is one that again definitely I'm curious to kind of jump back into again and kind of play past the first like hour or so I've gotten and really kind of dive into that world and those cast of characters.
Yeah, this is one of those that I would love. Even I don't even need like the full remaster treatment that we're getting, or the remake treatment that we're getting with like Final Fantasy VII. But this is one that I've always wanted to see, kind of get some kind of like
Yeah.
up-res love, but not in the like in the Steam/mobile version that they did a few years ago, where they like redid the art style away from the beautiful pixel art of the. I mean, my original Trevor Trove avatar is actually
Mm-hmm.
Tella from Final Fantasy IV, but it's like in the design of these kinds of characters. And I jokingly thought about for a while of making kind of characters of the eight of us nerds, all pulling like from characters from Final Fantasy VI as kind of like the evolution of Trevor Trove. And I might still do that someday. I don't know, but yeah, the art style of it, and the one of the things I would love from a remake or remaster of this is what Square has been like very, I think, smartly doing in some of their recent re-releases and remakes and remasters is that they're like they're recognizing, hey, some of these games are a little slow if you try and go back to them, and so being able to fast forward through combat, if you just want to enjoy the story, or just hey, you like combat had to go a certain speed back then because of all sorts of logistics and stuff. But if you're content to just kind of like hack and slash and attack your way through a lot of those enemies, which you can do, and then maybe you can slow it down for like boss fights and stuff, it makes like revisiting these games a lot easier. Like being able to play through something like Final Fantasy VII at 3 times speed means you can get through that game if you love it, like many people do, that much quicker. As kind of a hey, you don't have to commit that much time to it that you might have had when you were younger. So I would love to see them kind of give it a remake treatment where you can throw some of that stuff on, where you can get kind of some of the little exploits and stuff, just because it makes it, I think, a more fun and accessible experience for people that maybe miss the boat the first time around and want to dive in, but recognize that hey, games are a little bit more fast-paced these days, especially like RPGs and stuff. So I would love to see that come down the line, but until that day comes, I'm quite content having the game here at number 4 on the list. So I will go ahead and put that in there. And yeah, so I mean, like that said, I do look at Persona 4, Last of Us, and God of War, and it
Top
sounds
three.
like
It's a
we're
hell of a
gonna
top
have
three.
maybe some fun conversation now between which of those games is going to be number 3. It sounds like Cameron and Frank might be on the side of Last of Us as number 3, and I think Logan and I would certainly be more on the Persona 4 Golden side of number 3. Is that a fair reading of the room?
Yeah, I think so, Frank.
Oh yeah, yeah, I'm with you on this one, Cam.
Then Logan, yeah, you're well. Logan, having not played Persona 4 Golden, um, I'm guessing that's right.
I've played Persona 5.
Yeah,
I'm aware of the Persona series. I know quite a bit about Persona 4 Golden considering my time at IP.
yeah, and so I would put Persona 4 Golden here. Um, in part, like it's a great game. It's got a great cast of characters. there are a lot of elements of that game that don't work for me, especially in like a revisit, or especially in comparison to something like Persona 5. Like going back to Persona 4 Golden after playing Persona 5 and like Persona 5 having like exquisitely designed dungeons, and then going back to Persona 4 Golden's like randomly generated ones was frustrating. It it given the the Vita's hardware and stuff, you like all the enemies in that game when you're in the overworld are just kind of like blobs, like so you don't know who you're going to be fighting when you go into a fight, compared to Persona 5, where like the enemies were rendered in the world. Um, and I think I mentioned this back when Frank originally proposed it on episode 1, but for me your teammates in Persona 4 are probably like my favorite squad. I liked the wider cast of characters in Persona 5 better. Whereas like I look back at Persona 4 and I'm just like I don't even remember who a lot of the side non-party characters were that you would go and kind of level up your. I don't think there were confidants in that, but whatever the
It's just social links.
there you go, yeah, the social links. Like so few of those resonate with me, in a way that the Persona 5 ones I can still think back on, like the gun shop owner and the politician guy and the not chess but whatever the you know version of
Go.
chess. Yeah, it was it Go. Is it Go
No,
that the
Shogi. I
girl
think she
plays?
played
Yeah,
Shogi.
that
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
right.
that's it.
That
Shogi.
like the fortune teller. Like I remember all of those characters so much more, and I'm sure there's an element of it that's it's just more fresh in my head. But like both these games I played, in the last few years, and I just like the cast of characters I remember being that much stronger for 5 than for Golden personally. But I've gone ahead and said some of my stuff. So Frank, I want to throw it to you to I guess defend or argue, and obviously this is a you've mentioned before Persona 4 Golden, your favorite game of all time. Um, so I guess help try and convince as to why it should go up against Last of Us, and or God of War.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it was interesting what you said too about how you like the characters in 5 and kind of remember some of them more than 4. Where for me, it's a little bit more the opposite. And it's not that I don't remember the characters in 5. I just think the characters in 4 are a little bit stronger, and I think a lot of them have like better personal journeys and growth and like these moments of discovery that really stand out to me. And I definitely think it kind of I played it like in an important moment where that was kind of like very meaningful and impactful. And I definitely think that's something that 5 still has all that. Like that's kind of a Persona staple almost. But I think 4 has like these really strong character arcs you can kind of see from beginning to end. And I really like that like in the content they put out afterwards in that universe, you continue to kind of like see that growth and who these people went on to be, even down to the character designs kind of like changing. And you kind of see that in like the golden ending on Vita. I kind of think what you're saying about the combat kind of the dungeons is a little bit fair, but I think some of the like crafting and trying to like put these dungeons together, I think actually kind of like impacted Persona 5 a little bit and kind of took away from it. Like everybody remembers that space, kind of like dungeon for being really long and kind of just like repeating the same kind of design patterns over and over and over again. And that's definitely how I've kind of felt about that and some of the other dungeons. Even though I definitely think there's some of them are really cool designs and good ideas, I think that's something that like they can iterate a little bit better on. But I feel like the way that Persona 4 was kind of like randomized and kind of procedural with the way it generates dungeons, it took out some of the grinding aspect that wasn't as big for me. Like because it wasn't just the same, it's the same kind of like random patterns, but they're kind of like mixed together and there's different chests and you never know what you're going to find, and then you finally find the thing you're looking for. It's kind of like the mementos in 5.
Yeah.
And I definitely like they definitely kind of kept that idea with the mementos, and it's cool that we can kind of get both and they're kind of separated, and I like that iteration. But that's something I do definitely still like about 4, and that I definitely feel like it helps with the grind in 4, although the grind in 5 wasn't as bad.
Yeah, I mean, the grind in those games I think is often like what you make of it, especially since you can in both games you can basically like choose whatever difficulty you want to be, and you can I think in both games like switch it on the fly. Um, so if you want a harder, you know, go of it, you can. If you want it to be easier and less grindy, I mean, in both of the I want to say I put 200, 300 hours into both games, or yeah, definitely 200 hours plus in both, and I think maybe nearing 300 in Persona 4. Um, in the quest for that stupid platinum. I also, as I mentioned before, will resent Persona 4 Golden for that Resay trophy that kept me from
Oh
the platinum.
God.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
nightmare.
whereas
Eh,
I can proudly tout that I have the platinums of the other two games. Or no, I'm nowhere near the Last of Us platinum. Never mind. But yeah, I have the platinum for Persona 5. Ha ha ha. But yeah, I see your point, and it's when I say like I love the characters of four your core cast. Yeah, like Chie and Kanji and so many of like Naoto Naoto's is it now
yeah, Naoto and
yeah
like Yusuke, I
yeah
think it is.
yeah I was trying to remember if who's the girl in the in Persona 5 now then that isn't Naoto. Anyway, yeah, I
Oh,
love.
Haru.
No. Haru's like one of the weakest characters in Persona 5 for me. Just like she comes in you get her way too late in the game, and you've already got your cast of characters at that point. But anyway, but like
That's what I think
Teddy's,
one of the drawbacks of five is like it's really like long and like a bunch of stuff just keeps getting introduced at the end when it should just be wrapping up. Like
yeah, but I think like if you go back and play 4 Golden, you're gonna see the same kind of thing there too, or at least like that. I remember experiencing that when like the mystery starts winding down and all that stuff. They both have pacing problems in their end game, I think. Um, uh, just because you've been with them for so long, they're definitely not good games to like try and play in like a steady setting because it is like 100-hour story that you're trying to play through. Um, but yeah, and so I think even that maybe um, I would even put that as an argument against Persona 4 Golden in favor of something like Last of Us, which is more manageable in terms of like a I guess more a digestible story. Um, Logan, let me throw it to you to speak on behalf of Last of Us. We heard
I was
Cameron
actually,
a little bit earlier. Oh, sorry.
yeah. I mean, I was gonna say I was gonna hear from Cameron more if he had anything else to say. Um, you
About
have
The Last
anything?
of Us,
Just either game, either game.
either game.
Or
Okay,
all three of the games really. All I mean that are left here.
sure. To kind of wrap up what I was saying about The Last of Us is that I think one of the greatest strengths of The Last of Us is that you see Joel's growth with Ellie to the point where you forget who Joel is at the beginning of the game, and when that Joel comes back around the corner at the end, it's such a great like it's not a twist because like this is previous characterization that you've seen before. It's such a great focus on his internal character, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right, I kind of like this is different than what I was thinking it was going to go. And I think that that's great. I think my favorite moments of The Last of Us are those moments where it is kind of that more intimate storytelling with Ellie and Joel and some of the characters they come across along the way. You have, correct me if I'm wrong, his name's David, the town leader in the
Yes.
Yep.
yeah
In winter, yeah.
in Winter. Yeah, David is horribly frightening on tons of levels. I think as far as like as an art piece, I think that The Last of Us is very evocative in the way that it pulls out emotions. And I would say this is why I do compare it to Persona 4 Golden, because Persona 4 Golden came at a time in my life that is very, very, very unique. I was at a massive transitional point where I was having to say, like, basically the core group of people that I've known for like 10 years of my life was slowly not breaking apart but going their separate ways, and it was tearing me apart inside. And it was a point where as somebody who was single and, I'm now out, but at the time I wasn't, but single, I didn't have any children. My friends all have gotten, like, getting married, it starts to pull apart, and then once they all start having children, that takes it even further. Because you're just not within their sphere of, like, necessities or priorities anymore. Friendship is lower on the totem pole than family, especially for new parents. And it's such an incredible game in my life because I came up to the end of the game where I had this thought of, like, I just don't want this to end. I don't want this game to end. And the way that game ends and kind of the message that it sends is a little tropey. It's a little, like, very conventional with we're parting ways, but we'll never be apart, etc. It came at a time in my life that I really needed something like that. And I think that while The Last of Us is, I think, a incredible story, incredible game, and incredible experience that brought out a lot of emotion inside of me, and while, like, it's an incredible think piece, no doubt with what it's inspired as far as think pieces go. Friend of, I think, many of ours, if not all of ours, Jonah Peck, author, who wrote for IGN an article about how The Last of Us prepared him for fatherhood. That's, like, you see think pieces like that from pieces of art like The Last of Us, and if The Last of Us goes to number 2, that's fine. But I really do strongly believe that, on the flip side of it, now that I've spoken about The Last of Us, let me go ahead and say my piece about Persona 4 Golden a little bit deeper. Persona 4 Golden takes place during what is, without a doubt, a formative and very difficult time in, I think, pretty much everybody's life. It's high school. It's a story about your main character, your protagonist, who... There's things about Persona 4 Golden especially, that I enjoy seeing the little tidbits of the kind of predetermined personality, like, notes of the main character. They're very small and they're easy to miss, and it's to its detriment. I think that 5 does a much better job of, like, fleshing out who your main character is, because they do want it to be an avatar for you to insert yourself into the world. And in regards to that, I think that what you experience in those multiple relationships, it's not just one or two or a couple. Your relationship with Yosuke and... Or sorry, Yusuke. Not Yosuke. Yosuke is in 5. Your relationship with Yusuke is Yusuke dealing with the fact that, he is a little, like, it's that idea that you think that you're such a straight arrow kind of person. Like, you think about, like, the hypocrisy and other things going on, and you don't realize what's going on inside of yourself. And realizing that the depths of people have. You have Chie, who is somebody who is a character who is prone to, getting excited and getting physical and sometimes a little violent to protect people. And kind of her journey of, well, how does she balance femininity? How does she balance, like, her interests and what takes her? And, that's her story. Then you have Yuki, like, you have this entire cast of characters that goes through an incredible evolution of who they are. And by the time you get to the, post game ending that they added for Persona 4 Golden, you see the massive evolution in who they are. You see each of them much more confident in who they are. You see each of them knowing where they want to go in life. And it's such a look back, and it's such a really wonderful, like, emotional time capsule of moments where, you think that everything going on in your life at that time matters. And it, in a way, it does, but you also think, man, I can't wait to get out of here. And on top of that, it's a story that takes place where you're a transplant from Tokyo to this little town of Inaba, where, and I'd be remiss not to mention, I just realized I'd be remiss not to mention the relationship that your main character has with your cousin, who's a young girl, and your uncle, who is a single father, who's a detective, whose wife was murdered in a hit and run. And he's a detective, and it's his job to solve murders, and he can't even solve his own wife's murder. And
he's still struggling with that. Like...
Yeah, it's incredible, and, like, the ramifications that's had on his relationship with his daughter. and the relationship that you have as the three of you, where you are a relative, but the uncle says up front, he goes, "I haven't seen you since you were in diapers." Like, this is a family that's not close. Also, your main character doesn't have regular contact with his parents who are working overseas. Like, your parents left you in Japan and went to go work somewhere else. And while that's very typical of like anime and whatnot, that still is like something that it's very clear your character doesn't have a lot of bonds with other people, and it's your character and you growing and like being a part of these people's journeys, and it's a multitude of these journeys. And I think singularly, and it's this is a weird thing to say, and it's kind of wrong for me to say it, but the journey of Joel and Ellie as a singular journey of those two characters and how they evolve throughout their journey and where they go is very, is very in tune with also the same kind of progression and evolution of these characters' journeys that you see in a game like Persona 4 Golden, or just in literature or art in general, especially in an interactive medium. But I'm not surprised that 3 games that are strongly built off of the emotional journey of a core set of characters are our top 3 games. I think that those are some of the best kinds of stories to ever tell. But I feel like there are certain touchstones to Persona 4 Golden that touch on things that is not something that The Last of Us can touch on because of its scenario and its core focus on these 2 characters. It's hard for me to argue one is above the other. I really do love all of these games, but I really think it comes down to the question of, like, what game do I want to sit down and play again? That's an argument that, or not an argument, that's been a point that's been brought up with other games. Like, what game could I sit down and, like, just power through a weekend on? And what game would I want to do that with? And I think the answer for me is Persona 4 Golden versus The Last of Us. And so I think I've said my piece about just about everything. So, Logan?
Yeah, I think so. A few different things. I mean, like, I think first and foremost for me is the fact that the entire exercise that we're engaged in and that I'm about to partake in as well is pointless, because no matter what I will say, ultimately the number 1 game this list is going to be has been decided. It's just there in front of all of our faces. And I don't necessarily have to like it, but it's what's going to be it. Of course, the ghost of me not liking it as much as God of War, as much as everybody else, is going to haunt me into the show as well. But at the same time, me also being like, but it also has to be number 1. Just as I made it my game of the year, it's just going to haunt me forever. So, like, it doesn't really matter. I'm bereft of hope here, but I will make the gallant charge nonetheless.
Die on this hill, Logan. We're here for you. We'll catch you when you fall.
I think first and foremost for me is that, like, I have no desire to trash any of the other games. Like, I just don't. I think we've been there and done that in terms of the previous episodes and some of the other games on the list. Shout out to Mass Effect. And I just have no desire to trash any of these 3 games, really. I think they're all incredible, and I think part of it is the fact that, like, I know very intimately people who love and whose favorite game are one of all 3 of these games. That, like, I'm not really going to say a bad word on any of these games. And I also think that in kind of conjunction with that, it's the fact that this is a top 3 that is impossible to separate emotion from. These are our 3 favorite games of all time, with the exception of Cameron. And even he loves all 3 games. It's impossible to separate our feelings and thoughts and emotions on these games, particularly for me, Trevor, and Frank, who do see our 3 favorite games here. And so recognizing that, the fact that, like, this is not a logical argument that anybody's really making, I think Cameron said it very well, and Frank kind of alluded to it on his kind of discussion for Persona 4, with regards to the fact that, like, you play these games at moments in your life where you both need them, and it feels like they needed you to kind of hear their story. These characters needed you, that world needed you to be a part of it, and they leave kind of an indelible footprint on you. And I think that whether it is God of War or whether it's Persona 4 Golden or whether it's The Last of Us, those then become things that you can't speak about in the same way as other pieces of art. All three of these, I think, are quite brilliant pieces and works of art. All three of these, something Cameron also kind of touched on, are brilliant stories with wonderfully fleshed out human characters who are flawed and who are difficult and who are complex, and who are ambitious but are also bound by that awful disease that humanity has of just so constantly succumbing to not meeting their expectations and not meeting their potential, of being fallible. I think all to me are potent and powerful reminders of why stories matter, and particularly why stories matter in a video game. Right, like to me, the big villain here is not Cameron or Frank being like Persona 4 Golden is better than Last of Us. It's like the Ian Bogus of the world and their like Atlantic articles of like why video games should stop telling stories, and it's like, well, fuck you, like they shouldn't.
For real.
Right? Like it's that thing, and like I disagree with it at the time, obviously when it came out 2 years ago, but I just kind of was like, I'm not going to get engaged in an internet Twitter war if I can avoid it. But like this is my entire argument is that like, well, no, they're not, right? Like our top 3 games in this list, the top 5 games of this, the top whatever, like some of these games in this list are ones where stories matter, right? Like games that are just gameplay only really didn't fare too hot ultimately in the rankings. Like I think we play.
I would have to go back to, I think it looks like, arguably like Portal 2 or Super Mario Galaxy 2
Yeah.
for like our gameplay specific kind of.
And they were like 10, 11, 9 kind of area roughly.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think, yeah, like we, and like to be fair, you could argue like we are a quartet that like plays games for stories maybe more than the average person, but I don't necessarily know if I think that's true. I think that I've always made the case that why I love games and why I am drawn to games is for their ability to tell stories in ways that other mediums just can't quite match. I think the interactive nature of them adds such an extra layer of intimacy and connective tissue to what is happening on screen, right? Like it is Cameron and Frank and Trevor's story so much in Persona 4 or like something like in Mass Effect 2, right? It is their shepherd. It is their adventure on the Normandy kind of thing, right? And like even on games where there's kind of a layer of separation a bit more, like in something like The Last of Us, God of War, it is very much still your encounter with those characters and your journey through these kind of worlds and your interaction with the characters, right? And like while everybody's playing the same game and playing the same story in those things, they can do them in different orders, right? Like the famous one I always talk about is that like you can play all of The Last of Us and just miss Isha's story basically, which is such a great tragedy. You can play through so much of God of War and miss so many amazing, like tragic, heart-wrenching side quests or funny side quests. They're just information, like stories that fill in and add layers and colors to those worlds. And I think that like, to me, this list is ultimately an example of like why stories in video games matter and why they're so important and why I think single player focused games, which also dominate this list, are so important, right? As kind of the debate of like, well, single player games don't matter and like people are just going whatever, and it's like, well, they do matter, right? Like I ultimately think that like The Last of Us should be, it would be my personal top pick in this game. It is my favorite game of all time. It is again very much in the run for being my favorite story I've ever been told, but I also think that there's not really a bad option, right? Like I think Joel and Ellie's story is incredibly just heartbreaking and inspired and hopeful and backbreaking and depressive, but one that is ultimately just anchored by a single emotion that I think anchors all 3 of these games, which is love. And I think it is a game about love in the same way that I think ultimately God of War is a game about love, and I ultimately think Persona 4 Golden is a game about love, and just in different ways, in different kind of contexts. Like I think these are why games are important and matter. I think Ian Bogus can kind of get wrecked, and that I think, yeah, for me, I have no desire to talk trash about the games. I think The Last of Us is just quite special. I think it had a incredibly important impact on me for very kind of personal ways, um, and at a point in time in my life where it, I think, struck extra hard. The funniest thing for me for The Last of Us, because Cameron kind of hit on it earlier too, is that like my favorite playthrough of The Last of Us isn't even my first playthrough of the game. It's my second one. When I went through the game a year later, in 2014, and played through that game a second time, is actually my favorite playthrough of this game. It's the one that I always think back on, for again very kind of personal reasons of just like binging that game in 3 days, and like I haven't touched the game since. I haven't gone back to the game in 5 years, because it's just such a, I think, raw and special and powerful and beautiful piece of art. But like ultimately, like I would say, yeah, I would have The Last of Us ahead of Persona 4 Golden. I think ultimately, whether or not Persona 4 Golden or The Last of Us are second and third, again, we're all staring at the just reality of the fact that like, well, the game we haven't talked about is God of War. It'll be our number one game. And like I think three of us could maybe make arguments against it being number one, but I don't really have much of a desire to, because I think it's a great game, and even if I love it less than I think most of the critical kind of reception and press to it, I think it's still incredible. I think it's still beautiful. I think as somebody who loved the original God of War games, what it did to Kratos and his story and kind of the mythology of that character is nothing less than incredible from Cory Barlog and company. And yeah, there's not a bad pick here. And stories are important. And stories and games are important, and they should be valued, I think, and appreciated and kind of defended. And I think that for me is ultimately what matters most in all of these episodes of the show, is us kind of stand up and be like, well, these game stories are fucking rad, and we're just going to talk about stories for 15, whatever it is, it feels like, hours, because they matter and stories matter. And I think that it is something that makes us kind of inherently human, is our almost need to tell stories, our need to kind of share tales and have these characters kind of convey our flaws and imperfections, and just what makes us human in all of the worst ways possible, but also in the most like amazing and incredible, and inspiring ways possible. So that's what I would say. I think The Last of Us should be ahead. It doesn't ultimately matter because it's going to be God of War. It's a very just like pessimistic, dejected, just like it's going to be what it is. But like no, like I do think the conversation around all of these games, all 20 of them, and the few that were vetoed, shout out to Cameron, was ultimately it's the cliche. The journey was more important than the destination all along. Is ultimately what I reflect on most.
Well said. That said, we still got to pick a goddamn 3. So
I would say, I would say Persona 4 Golden, God of War, Last of Us, but
for me, I guess we're obviously kind of aware, but like it would be Last of Us, Persona 4 Golden, and then God of War. And
right.
like Persona 4 Golden is my favorite game of all time, and a lot of the reasons you said that you love The Last of Us is why I love Persona 4 Golden.
No. I'm not. So first off, I think it's that weird thing where like we can rank this backwards. Like God of War is gonna be the number one game on this list. Does anybody have any does anybody disagree with that? Like genuinely, like it's gonna be the number one game. Yeah, like
I think it's possibly the best game ever created. So
it's none of our favorite games, I don't think. Well, I know it's not. I mean, except for Trevor, but like it's one for me where it's just the fight is between Persona 4 Golden and The Last of Us. And we all can go, well, God of War is fantastic, and so it's gonna be number one. Like, it's like the easiest defense of his game ever. Trevor doesn't even have to make one. Just like, yeah, like it's gonna be that game.
He's like, it's a masterpiece. What else do you want from it?
Exactly, right. And so we're just gonna like go back and be like, all right, cool. Now what is 2 and 3? Like, sure, we can put the 1 on God of War right now. So it's like, all right, now it's a thing of like, I don't know if anybody's opinion has been swayed on terms of like it's Persona 4 Golden versus The Last of Us, though, because like again, I've said my piece on that. Frank has said his. Like Trevor or Cam, like have either one of you switched your opinions on which game you would have ranked where?
Yeah, no, and that's where like I'm learning, and I learned this a few episodes ago. But yeah, like for future seasons of the show, and what I want to do with season 2 is gonna be me as kind of the like tiebreaker. I will basically be the vice president in the Senate kind of vote
Hmm.
from a panel of 4 people making the picks. So I will. In future seasons, I will be like moderating the conversation, so we don't run into this issue where we come up into 50-50 ties. And part of that also stems from like the like learning the show as we go. Like the ranking piece is something I didn't even have mapped out or figured out like when we recorded the first episode of this show. I was like,
Hmm.
I don't know how we're gonna end up ranking everything at the end, but like it wasn't until I
We
think
did it.
Logan mentioned it in maybe that first episode, the idea of doing like 5 at a time, episode by episode by episode, that we got here. So this is all very much a learning experience, and this is kind of where we where the struggle comes in if it is kind of a 50-50 split. Because yeah, I still think The Last of Us stands out as just a phenomenal. It's one of the peaks of its genre. Persona 4 Golden, one of the peaks of its genre. Um, and for me, like one of the things that stands out from The Last of Us is that like we already knew for at least the 2 games beforehand, in Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3, and I would argue even in the first Uncharted, that Naughty Dog had like stumbled into something special in terms of their approach to action adventure and to a narrative, um, in the way that they started approaching those games, having come from Crash Bandicoot and the Jack and Daxter games. That when they stumbled upon that kind of approach, they lit a fire, and The Last of Us is, arguably, and maybe now the debate has extended into Uncharted 4, or I'm sure even some people would say a Lost Legacy out there. But like this was blew people away when Last of Us came out as um, holy shit, they topped themselves again. Like their prior 2 games were arguably 10 out of 10 masterpieces, um, and people were like they can't keep that up, and they did with Last of Us, and the storytelling that goes into that game, be it through the straightforward narrative that you get, or as Logan alluded to, like the environmental stories that you can get with something like Ish's story, um, are phenomenal. The combat is like great, a mix of stealth and action, and the way that you have to approach clickers versus the way you approach marauders in that game, um, can vary wildly, um, and it can also be terrifying when you come across like a bloater or something like that in that game. But it's one of those things that like was it you, Cameron, that said it's a little tropey in its kind of storytelling, and I don't I don't think I agree with that sentiment.
I think I was referring to Persona 4 Golden, but
Okay. Um,
yeah, I was
yeah.
referencing a moment of where it can get a little bit tropey about things towards the end. Persona 4 Golden, my thing about The Last of Us is, I think that clickers work really well when it's like one, maybe two or three of them. I think that what's the town that you get to where your buddy is, where he's like set up traps and stuff, and you have to deal with like the horde of them.
hmm I mean,
I
I
think when you get
like none of
to
them
the
are a horde. And given that I'm saying horde in terms of like I'd played Days Gone most
oh
recently.
yeah, I did not play Days Gone. I'm using horde in the pre Days Gone version of that word, because that's insane. Uh, no, like the more I always felt that the more clickers you got, the more like borderline busted it was. Where like I love the moment to moment clicker to like moment to moment with a clicker. Like a clicker all of a sudden showing up in my path was like gut punching, like to the realism, like okay, I really do have to try to figure this out. And usually my approach was just avoid them. because they're so like on their own, they're so messed up. But then you get to a part of the game where it forces you to confront an entire like mass of them all at once, and
And it's
it gets
frustrating.
it's just frustrating. It's so frustrating because it's like this is not how like this because you're not getting this sense of like I'd say almost adrenaline rush that you get when you're facing like one of them when you first stumble into them, or later on in the game when they're like hiding out and you just stumble upon them and it's like wait, how do I get past them to get around them? Do I have to fight them? Do I really have to? Versus oh, a whole bunch of them are charging at me and they've just it's when it goes from clicker to just this is their zombie that I get very frustrated because the clicker aspect of it, when it's just one or two or even three of them, feels so much different and so much more scary, in my opinion. And I don't feel that frustration when I die to one of them or two of them or even three of them. It's when it's whatever that town is that's in Pennsylvania that you have to go through.
Like when you're, are you talking like when you have to go to
And
like
the,
the
in the
school?
gym,
Yeah,
Billstown,
the
that
gym and
Billstown,
stuff.
the gym. Yeah, those moments were just so like because it's like it's not even that like I'm not scared of them. I'm not messing up because I'm scared of them or I'm worried that I might be tripping up or doing something. There's just it's just gets that is the only part of the game that I was truly frustrated by. And I think and it took me out of the feeling that I had for the rest of the game.
Right.
When I say the combat works great in my opinion when it's in those intimate moments. The game is amazing when it's intimate. When the game stops being intimate, it is which is not very often. It only happens at maybe one or two points of that game where it stops being so intimate,
I th-
where it stops being so personal and close and like borderline claustrophobic at points. But I think that when it does that, which is 98% of that game, it's downright incredible. But the moments where that slips and it's just like, come on, like really, like I can't like it's just like it got frustrating for me on several levels when it came to that part. But that's the only to me that's the only blemish on that game.
right.
Everything else about The Last of Us to me is picture perfect. So
I mean, I
So
don't,
this is a
I personally don't remember having any frustrations in that vein. And the
yeah.
one last thing I was gonna say before Cam jumped in there was like the only
oh
thing I
sorry.
would see that is like borderline tropey in that game is that all too common like end of the world um, kind of post-apocalyptic zombie outbreak thing where it's like the real danger is other people. Like that you see in Last of Us and so many other stories like that. But I would also say that Last of Us does it better than any others that I've seen. Like
Yeah.
the sense of desperation in that world in that game is palpable. In that same town, like seeing and I don't remember his name either, Hank or maybe something like that. But like his friend having hung himself in one like in a house, like you stumble upon he'd given up and he hung himself. It's like
You mean his
that is
boyfriend?
yeah, his boyfriend.
Yeah.
Like that is like a devastating moment in that game. And you have so many others throughout, like the what happens with the two brothers that you encounter, heart wrenching. All throughout, I
Mm-hmm.
think that game, like it's definitely not a feel good game
No.
in like oh Persona 4 Gold might be a happier jollier time kind of thing as you are investigating murders and stuff. Um, but like the way that Naughty Dog manages to tell that story and the imagery that they include in the those character beats and those moments um like stand out far and away above any kind of momentary like oh I died, okay, how do I need to approach this like sequence of oh there's six guys here I've got to kill, be it clickers, be it humans, whatever the case may be. How do I need to like what's the puzzle I need to solve to kill these guys in the right order or use the tools that are at my disposal to do it. Um, and that's certainly for me that's a much more engaging thing. Sorry, Logan, you were gonna say you were gonna respond to Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, so again, I don't know. This feels like, but like, I think first off, just in terms of like the frustration thing, I think that's a strange. I think that's just like a curious critique to make, if only because Persona 4 Golden is so long that like that game inherently has frustrating moments in it, right? Like it's like every game has frustrating moments. Like I guess that's my like my counter to that is that like well every like this you're playing a video game. Like I don't think The Last of Us is frustrating. I didn't really have that sensation, but if somebody said they did at some point in a 20-hour experience, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I mean, sure. More often, like 90% of it is fine, though, right? And in a 80 or 90 or 100-hour long game, however long Persona 4 Golden might take you to get through, I'm quite assured in the fact that like that game is frustrating at times. Even more so, I have not played Persona 4 Golden, obviously, but known it quite well, but having played Persona 5, right, and getting 30 hours into that game, it's been like, I just want this game to be half as long as it is, right? Like, for me, the biggest hang up on Persona games has never been the story, which I enjoy quite a bit, although I have my issues with Persona 5 at the very least. It's the gameplay, which I find not enjoyable, really. I don't enjoy the dungeons. I don't enjoy not knowing what I'm doing even 30 hours after I'm in the game, still just learning what to do in this, right? Like, I think I never felt like I was totally comfortable knowing what I was doing in Persona 5, and I'm just going to include that in Persona 4 Golden as well, just because it's very similar games, and just like not, I think, combo-wise know what you're doing, but that even that is really beside the point. I think that I mean I guess my point is that like I don't being frustrated or finding something that you don't whatever in a game is what it is, but I mean these are things that are not 90 minutes 2 hours long like a movie. They're things that are 20 hours long or significantly 3 times that length, 4 times that length, and that you are actively playing it, right? So if you die during something and have to do it again, that is a story that cuts both ways, right? Where it's like you get to live out the story, you get to build out your story, but if you fail, you failed, right? Like I don't necessarily know if I can blame a game for that, right? And I enjoy the gym scene in The Last of Us. It's not my favorite part of the game, but I enjoy it well enough. I think Billstown as just a whole section is an absolute highlight of that game. I think that I think what works for me for The Last of Us is that it is the shortest of the 3 of these games. I think that it is paced very well. I think Sugar kind of touched my point earlier of like pacing in Persona games haven't always been an issue for me in terms of like why I stayed away from 3 and then stayed away from 4 to a degree. And then even when I got into 5, just like I think there's something to be said for, and I think Trevor actually touched on this earlier for another game, but I can't remember what it is, so forgive me for that, where it's like, if this thing was, I'll say like Persona 4 Golden is an 80-hour video game just to make the math easier, where it's like, if it was a 50-hour video game, like I think it's a great 80-hour game, but it could have been like an amazing, spectacular, like 50-hour game or something like that, or like a 40-hour one, right? Where it's like, I just think the Persona games inherently are just too long for me and for what I want out of this game, for what I want out of that story, right? Because now we're at a point in time with just like a personal like thing of like for all of these things, but it's like this is just they're too long, right? Like I think there is something to be said for leaving somebody wanting more versus giving them so much of something, right? Giving them a year with these characters, right? Because like each Persona 4 or Persona games in general, right? And The Last of Us each kind of take place over the course of a year. And I think they do that in very different ways. But I think I would hardly call a 20-hour game like full of brevity, but like the brevity in comparison, and the way that it kind of bounces along, I enjoy more than The Last of Us. Like I think, like it's also the thing too, like as kind of a final touch on, is that like I think one of the most criminally continuously disappointing and upsetting things to me and like all the video game discussions is and like Kevin at least like acknowledge the fact that it's fucking great. It's the fact that like the Last of Us combat is so routinely just like ignored. It's like I think the combat in Last of Us is incredible and is so rad and is so cool and feels so viscerally good, and people just never talk about it because like the story is what it is. Obviously, like it's a masterpiece, but like the combat is also great and does draw me in, right? And like I think that each of the three games we have left before, whether it's God of War, whether it's The Last of Us, whether it's Persona 4 Golden, do things within their stories and also the combat that I think are really special. But for me, the weakest of the three combat-wise is Persona 4 Golden. And I just think that's also indicative of the fact that like I just enjoy that genre of game less, and just inherently like I am alone among us. I think it's fair to say the sole I'm not a JRPG guy. Like I need to be
Yet.
pushed in that direction. Sure, I need to be pushed in that direction more. And so like when it happens, I'm like, oh, this is a JRPG I enjoy, sure. But it's just a steeper climb. But like even that is one where it's like I think it's just one where it's like I like ultimately don't know how. Like I'm also at the point too where it's like I don't know where we're at in terms of like breaking the deadlock, but like
yeah,
because it's that thing too of like ultimately I think The Last of Us is I mean obviously it's my pick for number one on this game on this list, right? And so like if we were to like do it like that, like that's what I would say is that like that's it gets my points for that, right? And then I would say God of War, and then I would say Persona 4 Golden, right? And if Frank is The Last of Us, Persona 4 Golden, and God of War, Cameron I would assume is The Last of Us, Persona 4 Golden, and God of War.
yeah.
And Trevor is Persona 4 Golden, Last of Us, God of War. Then if we were to rank those by like point system, it would be Persona 4 Golden, The Last of Us, and God of War would be the ranking based off of that.
Wait.
What?
Is what I would say. Well, because if you so again, if the two of you have The Last of Us at the bottom, all right, you with me?
Yeah.
And me and Trevor have Persona 4 Golden at the bottom. And then for second picks across the board, it would be I'm assuming for Trevor, but it would be The Last of Us.
Yep.
And then for me, it would be God of War, right? And then for the two of you, it would be Persona 4 Golden. And then number one is God of War for the two of you, and for Trevor, and number one is Last of Us for me. Then if we ranked those as a 3-2-1 system, the points would break out as Persona 4 Golden, The Last of Us, and God of War. Because neither one of you two have Persona 4 Golden as your top pick, whereas The Last of Us is my top pick, is what
Well,
I'm saying.
I'm also like
So if you break it
realistic
down
with
like
it. And,
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm ranking the list based on like what other
assume-
people are gonna pick,
I
and
assume,
God of
but
War is
that's
a
what
great game.
That's
Yeah.
why I'm not arguing that point. But that's what I'm saying is like that is a way to break the deadlock on that regard as well. Is that like well then just by that as alone, it would be 3, 2, and 1 based off of that.
And I mean, I would like taking that back. I was gonna throw out there back in the like in our original rankings of like hey the like we all ranked our games. I'm like where did you like Logan? Where did you have Persona 4 Golden? Period. Like where was it in your like now that we're down to your number three? It's or the three games left. It's your number three.
It's number
but,
3, right?
But where did you have it on your original list?
So this is the part of the issues that like I never had just like my Logan Wilkinson's list. I did it based off like what like my like compromises and make deals, and make negotiations, right? So my original top 5 was and like not ranked necessarily, but my original top 5 was The Last of Us, BioShock, Last of Us, BioShock, God of War, Persona 4 Golden, and Grand Theft Auto. Right? I think so. With like Final Fantasy 6 being number 6 was what I would have had. Because in mine was like, I assume like I'll have like the Trevor pick, the Cam pick, the Frank pick in there, like these kind of things. And also because they're all great games. And like that was how my like original top 5 looked like, right? Kind of thing.
Gotcha.
I didn't have like my like top 5 because that was when like where it was like, well, there's no point in me doing that, like bring into that in the same vein because like it won't shake out the same way.
Yeah. So and I at the same time I see the point that Cameron and Frank would bring up of like they didn't design their top 3 based off of like a scoring metric that you're now trying to
Sure,
put
no,
onto it. So
I'm bringing in the table
Yeah,
that
yeah.
as like a point of like,
Like,
well,
We
have
do
to figure
so
out
we
the
have to
deadlock.
we do have to figure out how to get out of this deadlock.
so realistically, yeah, like Cameron here could be the tiebreaker, as like the 3 of us all have our kind of our primary picks. But what I've also got here in the doc, I've gone through and I've got like I've got a random number generator that's about to spit out a number, and I've got basically if it spits out 1 through 50, it's Last of Us is number 3. If it spits out 51 through 100, Persona 4 Golden is number 3. Like if we can't come up with any other, if nobody's gonna budge, I have that as a potential option for us to play around
Oh
with.
gosh.
I mean, I guess I would take that over the point system.
Yeah.
I mean, I would vehemently have to be clear. Like, I'd rather just walk. I mean, like, no, I that to me is the worst case scenario of us just being like, well, let's just throw our hands up and not make a decision here. Like,
Well, we can't make a decision because
I think the 4 of us together are intelligent enough people to make a decision whether or not we like one video game next than the other. And like, I guess my thing is that like, I look at the top 5 games we have here: Mass Effect 2, Persona 4 Golden, Final Fantasy 6, Last of Us, God of War. Like looking at those 5 games, right? And like out of those two, I look at like as Frank loves 4 of those 5 games. Probably it's fair to say. I would argue maybe like Final Fantasy 6 is the one where it's like more dicey, and then like Cam likes probably all 5 of those games. I think it's probably fair to say.
So let me tell you what because I actually did
Out
a
of that
personal
top
ranking.
5, I think it's fair. Like you either like or love all 5 of those games.
I love all 5 of these.
Yeah,
games.
Trevor loves all 5 of those games. I love God. I mean, I love Last of Us and God of War, and it's the thing of like Mass Effect 2. I don't even want to get into again. Persona 4 Golden is one where it's like, I don't know. At this point in time, I'm just kind of also burned out on Persona. And then Final Fantasy 6 is one where it's like I respect, but it's that thing like I also just have like, and also think like again, like I think it's a thing like I just have the least like horses in that top 5 as well, and so I think looking at a top 3.
I'm pretty sure I have the least horses. I don't have
in terms of your actual games that you nominated, sure, but like again, you love all 5 of those games. Like there's like it's one for you where it's like realistically you could rank that top 5 any way you want to, and like it's like I don't know, like I love all these 5 games kind of thing for you. Whereas like for me, it's like I love The Last of Us and I love God of War, and then it's like other 3 are like I like these games because people like these games a lot, and I know people like these games a lot. I'm looking at 3V for starters. But like I have less like kind of representation in that top 5 than anybody by I would say a margin, and so I think another factor is that like well hey like we have a chance now in the top 3 to do something about that as well, right? Where it's like again we all agree in God of War it's just gonna be number 1, but like in terms of like how the top 3 will shake out as a whole, I don't think that's an invalid argument to be made as well.
I do I do
I
like the
I
idea of the top 2 games being ones we've all played.
Also that
And versus and obviously Persona 4 Golden being the one that like Logan has not played. We talked about that a little bit in last week's episode.
the previous episode I made, where again the majority of the games in the top 5 Ultimate are ones where at least one person hasn't played, whether it's me or Frank or Cam. It looks like,
And that and
I played all these games.
or me or Frank. Then
I mean, I've played
Yeah,
all of
I don't know
them.
who the.
I haven't beaten.
Somebody marked
I haven't
Final Fantasy
beaten.
VI.
I haven't beaten Final Fantasy 6. So I played it.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, so I would like that's another thing that I would like to be considered in potentially tipping the scales towards Persona 4 at number 3, as it is a game that 3 of us have enjoyed, but the other 2 I think all 4 of us like like I said last week, I would have almost expected Grand Theft Auto Vice City to be a little bit higher on the list because all 4 of
That,
us
I
like
also agreed.
jumped on that as like that's a great game. And I recognize that like I also was the one that shot down BioShock under that same like criteria because I didn't like that game as much as you 3 guys did. But I think that's something that for the sake of this list could maybe should be considered. But obviously, I say that and recognize again that like that would tip the scales in the favor of Logan and I don't want to make that a unilateral like kind of call or anything like that. So that is it
How do
does
we
come
do
down
this?
to I do have like I agree like with Logan. I would like for somebody to bend one way or the other so we can we can make this call ourselves and not rely on a random number generator. Um, but
I have an idea, you guys. I have an idea.
okay.
I know this usually starts off with me when I
Yeah,
say that
exactly.
it's
That's
a
my
bad
greatest
idea.
issue. It's kind of like, all right, well,
What if we all call our moms and we just say no context, completely out of context, Last of Us or Persona 4 Golden, and we see whose mom, like how many moms say which one.
yeah. I mean, that's
this-
definitely kind of something in the vein that I thought you might. Yeah.
Is that what the? I just, I don't know.
I needed some brevity. I needed some light air here to kind of like because we're getting really bogged down, and I need some.
That what that was
I needed
supposed to
some-
be?
I think for me, like, it's that thing too of like, I don't know, like, because again, I preface it being like, I'm not gonna like, I have no desire, like, I'm not gonna attack these other games. So, like, I like, like, it's a thing like, there are issues I think with Persona 4 and Persona as a series in terms of how it handles other groups of people that I think haven't aged great, right? But like, I have noticed, like, I don't want to fucking drag down another game to bring my game up higher, but like, there are arguments against Persona 4 Gold and how it's aged, I think, and how Persona games have aged in general, right? But like, that's not the fucking point. I think the point should just be like, we should be celebrating all three of these games, and not get bogged down in this stuff. Like, I think we can make a pick without calling anybody's mom, and without hopefully using a number generator to be like, all right, like, it's Persona 4 Golden, this Last of Us. Like, and like, it's funny too, because like, if it had been the other side of this argument, it is that thing for me where it's like, I'm not in love with the fact that like the game that is gonna be number one on the list is a game that is exactly 1 year old. Like, that definitely feels like, I wish it was getting those. I wish it got to work out like just a little bit later on. Like, I don't love that. Like, and that's totally one for me where it's like, it wouldn't even matter. Like, even if it was like The Last of Us, like, it's just a thing of like, man, like, we are the guys out here being like, it's a year old. It's the fucking greatest thing ever. It's like, all right, I wish it was just a little bit like more like time to reflect on that. But like, on the other end of that, it's fact, like, I think the just like the fact of like, yeah, like, I think some, like, it's a thing we've said for a lot of these games lists where it's like they've aged varying degrees of like either spectacular or not spectacular. And so I think just that thing with like how like they've held up in terms of like how they've aged and handled certain issues is a factor.
I mean, I was also going to throw out because Cameron, you mentioned like of those two games, you would sooner sit down and hop into Persona 4 Golden
Over a
for a
weekend,
day,
yeah.
for a day or a weekend or whatever.
I never said I'd beat it in the weekend.
Right.
It's just the game
That's
I
what I was
would
gonna
hop
say. Is like
into.
you won't even get out of the tutorial sitting down with that game for like a weekend. Versus like as I'm thinking about it, and as Logan talked about like how he remembers his second playthrough of Last of Us. That was the first game I ever streamed as a well, streamed as anything really.
That's
But it's
right,
also
yeah.
I streamed it as my first Extra Life stream. I did like a full playthrough of Last of Us, and then I went into Telltale's Game of Thrones as like, and those two things took 24 hours. Like 23 hours. I think I spent like an hour doing Lego Dimensions or something at the end. But like that to Logan's earlier point, like there is a nice bit of like I think of these three, Persona does have like the weakest pacing, and
Well, I think that's
it's
also a difference of. I think it's important to note that a game like Persona in the Persona series, it's not so much a meant to be a like how many hours did you clock kind of game. It's a game that's built itself off of asking you to like to live in that game.
yeah, and well, but
I
this,
don't think The
spend-
Last of Us game
just-
is meant to be how many hours did you clock in that
No,
game.
no, 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 no. I was referring to Persona 4 Golden specifically.
but yeah, no,
It's-
I mean, I'm saying like
so when
Persona 4 Golden as a 100-hour game or whatever, like fine, but it's like if you're enjoying that over the course of 2 weeks and just really trying to crank it out, or over the course of a year or whatever, like it's still like when I say pacing, it's there are a lot of like that game doesn't end when it should, in the same way that Persona 5 doesn't end when it should. And I would argue, like it it reaches like a nice like, hey, this is a good comfort point in this game, and then it goes on for another 20 hours, and um, like your enjoyment of that is going to vary wildly based on how much you enjoy those characters, and if they can like pull you through that, that certainly like makes it better. But it
But I
even there, that's only going to do so much. There's still a lot of like end game, and it might not even be end game or like it's middle game versus end game or whatever. But there's a lot of fat on that game that could be trimmed, I would think, and that's any Persona game. It's any JRPG of these kinds of ilk. Final Fantasy VI as well could be. You can chop certain chunks of that game out to help streamline it, um, and I think make it a a tighter experience without losing too much. Frank, you were going to say something.
I just think that like for to piggyback on kind of something you said about kind of like how much your enjoyment of the characters can kind of get you through. And I think that's kind of I think you could kind of say the same thing about The Last of Us, at least for me personally, because I think not to say it's a bad game or anything, but I think out of all of us, I
All right, you
probably
know
like
what?
The
I'm so
Last
done
of
with
Us
this.
the
Fuck this.
least.
Fuck. Like, I'm already done with this conversation. Like, this is annoying to me. Like, I have no desire. Like, This is such a silly thing. Like, see, now we're getting to that point where I want to avoid it. Where it's like, I'm not saying it's a bad game, but like, it's kind of a bad. It's like, no, we're done with it. Like, fuck this. The Last of Us is 3. Persona 4 Golden is 2. God of War is 1. I'm tired of this. I just want to call my girlfriend because she's gone for 2 weeks. I don't be in this conversation anymore. I don't be in this argument anymore. I'm tired of this. This is fucking ludicrous. Like, now we're in the fucking bizarre zone. We're trying to say The Last of Us is a bad game. It's like,
I never
I'm
said it was
tired
a
of this.
bad game.
I
I
don't want
said
to do
I'm
this
not
anymore.
saying it's a bad game.
But even, that's an insinuation. That, like, whatever, fine. I've made my pick. I'm switching. I'm the one who breaks. Like, you've snapped my fucking sanity. I already said earlier on. I've lost the hope. I don't care anymore. Like, whatever, fine, do it. I don't even give a shit anymore. Let's make it The Last of Us be 3, Persona 4 Golden be 2, God of War be 1, because this is insane. Nobody's willing to fucking make a compromise in this podcast, and I feel like I've made so many. So it's whatever, fine. Let's make one less compromise. I don't care anymore. Last of Us can be 3, right? Mass Effect 2 is already in the top 5. I don't give a shit anymore. Whatever. Make it whatever. I don't care. It's dumb. This is an insane conversation we're having. Nobody's willing to make a compromise on the show other than me. Last of Us can be 3. It is fine. It is absolutely fucking fine. I can live with that in my life and be totally okay and go to bed tonight happy. This is ludicrous, guys. All right?
All
Let's
right.
just be done with this show. Trevor, do the outros. Love a guy.
The random number generator spat out 75 at the first go, which would have put Persona 4 Golden at number 3 for what it's worth. But if we're good with that, I would, before we throw into the outros, as God of War was the was basically identified as the champion, 30 minutes ago or whatever. But I do want to speak to it real quick as helping to justify that. It is, and I talked about this when I pitched it, and the comment that Logan alluded to earlier was me talking about God of War, in that God of War could have been a good or a great 50-hour game, but they cut it down and they edited it down to a phenomenal 30-hour game. Everything in that game feeds into the kind of one main story that they have, and they do a great job. Even the side quests, they call attention to the fact that these are helping Atreus, get stronger for the journey ahead that he needs. He needs that strength. He needs that. Phenomenal cast of characters. Baldur's an incredible villain that I think is wonderfully fleshed out as that game goes. Kratos, it takes Kratos from being, angry God of War 2, God of War 3, Athena or Calliope or whatever, like him just screaming things, and it gives him heart, it gives him something to care about. Because I would argue that like even early Kratos was best when he was caring about his family that he had lost and had been kind of tricked out of. The Leviathan Axe is going to go down in history as like one of the all-time great video game weapons, in a game that also had the Blades of Chaos as one of the all-time great video game weapons. I love the Metroidvania light elements of it that I think we talked about back when we were talking about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. The way that that game opens up very literally when you get to kind of the Lake of the Nine, and its various like water levels is phenomenal, and there's just constantly more and more to explore in that game. I very much enjoy it. It is something I've played through 4 times now, just because it's a great game to go back to. And yes, it is only a year and a half old, but that doesn't mean it's not like that. Just means it has learned and been built off of the backs of all these other great, phenomenal games. So that's my piece on God of War being number one. Um, and yeah, I cede your point, Logan. I'm sorry. Like I said, I will prevent this kind of frustration happening in future seasons by not serving on the panel as myself, and more serving as a moderator, so we don't run into these 2-2 splits in the future where nothing's gonna give. So, thank you all for joining me on this phenomenal first season of that Ultimate Video Game List show. Thank you for bearing with us as things got heated. I think we all, the passion that we all share for all of these games is certainly palpable in the 15-ish hours that we've spoken on them over the last 10 weeks. So I'm very grateful to have kicked this off with the three of you. If you want to be involved in the next season, I've created a Google form that you can go to at thatnerdysite.com/VGListGuest. I believe that's the link. If it's not, that's what it will be the link by the time this episode goes live. Or you can let us know name, email, Twitter, and recording dates, basically that work for you. It's effectively a 10-week commitment is what we will be looking for. If you want to be part of the show, go fill out that form. Let me know, and I will start over the next few weeks trying to collect a panel for season 2. So thank you again, guys. Our top 5 then to round out this week's episode. Mass Effect 2 at number 5, Final Fantasy 6 at number 4, The Last of Us at number 3, Persona 4 Golden at number 2, and 2018's God of War at number 1. Thank you, Logan, for making the hard call on that. Sorry we broke you again. I
Love you.
I love you. Yeah. You can follow Logan at LeftyLogie. Anything you want to shout out, Logan?
The only thing that I want to check me out on Lifter Logie, all that kind of stuff, that nerdy site, all the good things. Only thing I want to shout out, it's very important to me, is the fact that 007 Nightfire is one of the 20 greatest games of all time, and I'm glad that we could all come around the table to agree on that most important thing that it is. And not only is it one of the 20 greatest games of all time,
it's better than
not even in the bottom 2.
It's better than Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Mega Man 2. And that is just a fact. That is
007 Nightfire is one of the 18 greatest games of all time, and really that's the important thing that I think we all can consensusly agree on as both a host and also audience, that it is indeed one of the true greats of all time. So I think knowing that, we can all ride off into the sunset together happily here.
That's the only game where only one space of people who have not played it is not, like, 3 of us haven't played that game.
Yep.
That is the only game on this list that 3 of us haven't played.
And here's the thing about that. It's the power of, I think, James Bond Nightfire that we really just can see, even without having played it, just how special of a video game it is. You know what I mean? Like, people always say, man, like, I wish I was there to see, like, Hank Aaron play, or, like, Michael Jordan. It's like, man, I wish I was there in the moment to have, like, lived and played Nightfire in, like, the fresh when it came out. And, like, let me tell you what, boys, like, it was like nothing else. It was like a sight for your eyes, like a visual wonder. So just, like, think about that and know that we all agreed that it is indeed one of the 18 greatest games of all time. Yeah, just, like, we made it. We did it. Like, we made James proud today.
Hypothetical question for you, Logan.
Yeah.
Knowing what you know now, would you have used your veto on Persona 4 Golden?
No, like, totally not. No, like, okay, like, it is also that thing. It is also that thing. Like, ultimately, like, where we're at, it's that point who, like, after the first episode, we made the joke of, like, man, this is basically top 5, and it's like ultimately, or after the first 5 games, I guess, because God of War, like, ultimately 5 of the top 6 picks are the 5 games we first nominated. It's like that top 5 we picked was a murderer's row of video games. Like only Matrix snuck in there otherwise, but it's like that was a murderer's row. Like we all knew it going in. Like it's going to be a battle at the end. Like it was a fight. Like we picked a murderer's row Yankees basically of games, and so it's like no, I wouldn't have knocked Persona for Gold. And like people love Persona for Gold, and people love Persona. Like this isn't Logan Wilkinson's Ultimate Video Game List show. It is That Nerdy Site's like the 4 of us Ultimate Video Game List, and I think this is a list that reflects that, right? It reflects people who love games. We got Tony Hawk Pro Skater in here. We got Sonic. We got Mega Man. We got Wind Waker in the top 12 despite Cam. Like we got Mario Galaxy 2 in the list. We got Hellblade in the top 8. Like we got games in here that reflect, I think, all of us. And God of War being number 1 for Trevor. Like Persona 4 being there for Frank. Match Effect being high up. Like Last of Us obviously in the top 3. Like this is a list that I think reflects the kind of 4 video game editors on the site. Touch Effect being on the list. Like it is a list that I think reflects us and reflects who we are as people and who we are as a site. And so again, ultimately, I wouldn't have vetoed any of the games on this top 20 list. I think they're reflective of who we are as people and who we are as a site. And so again, knowing that, and also knowing just as importantly that James Bond 007 Nightfire is one of the 18 greatest games of all time, I'm totally content and happy with the list and looking at everything that I think it reflects for us.
All right.
I guess you would like assume this would happen, but it's kind of cool that everybody's favorite of all time kind of made it in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. You can follow Cameron at RevCabot, 2 B's and 2 T's. Anything you want to shout out, Cameron?
I should have a pseudo-editorial piece coming out on Handsome Phantom within the next week or two. Also, want to say that as somebody who was both the first veto and that game also still got on anyway, I'm very happy that happened. I think there's been this misconstrued idea that just because I early vetoed meant that I hated Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. I'm very happy it made it on. Now, did I want Wind Waker that high? No, but I concede. As history will tell me later on, I was very wrong about that game. I will never admit to it. But also I wanted to point out that really when you look at this list, Logan, we got Hellblade at number 8.
We got Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice at number 8, kids. Like, we did it.
And it was the Switch version.
I was going to say that on the
version.
Nintendo Switch, yeah. It is the greatest Switch game ever made, Hellblade. We did it. We did it, boys and girls. We did it.
But this
You also got Hellblade 2 during the podcast.
This definitively identifies that the Vita is better than the Switch. Persona 4 Golden.
Oh, yeah, that's
Best
right.
system of all time.
Vita lives, man. Vita lives.
Yeah, shout out to the PlayStation just being way better than Nintendo, guys. Like 1, 2, and 3 PlayStation games.
Yeah, boom, boom, boom. All right, you can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes. Anything else you want to shout out and celebrate about the list, Frank?
Oh yeah, there's nothing out at the moment, but I am going to be working on Game of the Year stuff. I want to do a Game of the Year video that I was kind of thinking about today, so be on the lookout for that. It should be up on the YouTube channel soon.
Great. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. This being one of our first podcasts of the new year, when this goes out. Keep an eye out all through January. We're going to have personal top 10s going out for video games, for movies. A couple of us, I think, are going to do TV shows as well for 2019. I was showing kind of the crew here on the show right before we started recording. We're going to be doing kind of that nerdy site ballot for Game of the Year categories. So like each of us will have our own individual top 10s, and then we'll kind of try and identify, that role-playing game and that action game, that adventure game of 2019. So keep an eye out for that all January. You can find all that stuff over at That Nerdy Site, at thatnerdysite.com. Please, especially, we're going to be going off for a couple weeks now while I round up a panel for season 2. Whoever is foolish enough to volunteer to be a part of this mess. But please go ahead, like, share, subscribe everywhere you can. Go check out our other podcasts. That Nerdy Site show being one of our flagship ones. That Wannabe Film Class. In the new year, we'll be launching that anime show, that anime pod, sorry, as well as that D Plus show to focus on Disney Plus activity. So please check out all those shows while we go off and celebrate this list. I will probably also do some kind of like by the numbers analysis because I'm a nerd like that of where this top 20 list is shaken out. The panel might be we talked about potentially everybody kind of going through and what their personal top 20, like what this list would have looked like if they had ranked it and they alone. So we might see a little bit of that over on the site. Yeah, go check out all that stuff. Thank you again, everybody, for joining me. Again, if you want to be part of Season 2, go to thatnerdysite.com/VGListGuest, and yeah, I will be in touch. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.
Shout out to Nightfire.